All right, so a little while back. So last class we covered derabbanans, exactly what's going on with that, because we have a prohibition that you can't add to the Torah and subtract from it. So like, what's going on? So it looks like derabbanans are a little bit of adding and subtracting. So the way we kind of describe this one is that derabbanans really are not. The way that you say would be over this prohibition would be, say, Sukkot is a 7-day holiday. Well, it's when you add an 8-day. Like the intrinsic nature of Sukkot is by definition having 7 days. Well, adding to that's a problem. But say shofar, where the only thing that has anything to do with the mitzvah shofar is just blow the thing. So there's no limit to it. You can blow it as many times as you want. Adding shofar blows would not be a prohibition based on this idea of not adding or subtraction to the Torah. So a derabbanan does have some wiggle room in the sense that it's some wiggle room, right? It's not going to fall under this prohibition because it's not as though the derabbanans are adding new mitzvahs per se, but rather they serve a function to enable the doing of the mitzvahs that we have. So I gave 4 examples of avoiding mistakes in halacha. Idea like that is muksa. Muksa on Shabbos is to protect people from carrying. Maybe people will forget you should.
You know how people they put upon themselves extra things just for their own sake to put fences around. So how come derabbanan, like keeping second day, for example, isn't optional?
Back to last week, we're gonna deal with chumras in a second class. There's these stringencies. That's a different creature. We'll talk about that.
Okay.
But keep second day.
I know.
So one is avoiding mistakes, and muksa is a good example. That we don't allow playing with objects needlessly, and that's it's a reminder. Wait a second, be careful with how you play with objects on Shabbos because hey, you can't carry that out into the public domain, the reshus harabim. Another function is it preserves the nature of halacha. An example of that is not asking non-Jews to do malacha on Shabbos. That preserves the nature of Shabbos. You might be technically doing everything right, but man, wouldn't Shabbos look different if you'd ask your non-Jewish neighbor to turn on your TV, cook you up a nice pizza, and buy you a lotto ticket and maybe you win. That's not Shabbos, although technically you're keeping it. So it's preserving the nature of those sort of halachas. It instills moral spiritual lessons, which is exactly what Purim and Hanukkah are doing. That Purim is we of course before Purim we believed that God's hidden in the world and He's behind the scenes making stuff move. But it's something that's such a hard thing to get in your bones that we need to make a holiday that very much highlights that particular idea. So it's not a creation of a new idea, but again, trying to preserve it, to make it more prevalent, to strengthen what already is there. And preserving the national character would be another function of derabbanans. That's the whole idea behind not being allowed to eat things that non-Jews cook, in order so that we don't start hanging out, having great block parties with non-Jews, and then end up marrying non-Jewish folk. That preserves the character of the Jewish people. Okay. And the next question we dealt with was, how religious are derabbanans? Is this a man thing or is this a God thing? And we had 2 positions on this. We had the Ramban that asserts no, this is purely functional. That while it's true, the Torah does obligate us to listen to rabbis in Beis Din. When we ask a halachic shaila, we're stuck with whatever their answer is, whether we like it or not. Well, that's true. But no, derabbanans are functional. They're not a new sort of mitzvah. It's not its own religious thing. Whereas the Rambam argues no. Man was given Tzelem Elokim. It's the basis of free will. It's the basis of spirituality. We are godly. And by definition, what a godly thing does is it creates. We don't just sense morality. We don't just understand what's really there, but there's something to people that we can actually create more of it. And so for the Rambam, when a derabbanan is made, it actually becomes its own mitzvah aseh or a lo taseh. It becomes a deraisa. Min Torah. It's a Torah thing. So this has some practical questions to it of, what my wife said not to tell this, but I'm doing it anyway. That, do you have to do tshuva if you break a derabanan? So for the Rambam, who says it's a new spiritual mitzvah, of course you have to.
I need to do tshuva for the past 20 years of my life.
Right. Yeah.
Do I?
Well, no. What with the second day thing? Well, no. Well, the Rambam would say yes. The Rambam would say, like any other tshuva, you say, shoot, sorry, I didn't mean to, I didn't. I made a mistake. This is the mistake I made. You verbalize it. You want to really articulate this well, organize what it is you did wrong in your head, and say, okay, I'm not doing that sucker ever again. That's how you do tshuva.
Okay, that's easy.
That's easy. Well, what's not easy is a lot of times the thing, whether it's a derabanan, deraisa, it's, whenever we screw up, there is the actual screw up that we did. But man, is it not obvious that's what you should be as sorry about? What's motivating those sort of behaviors you have? Let's say that you're in the Makullet and the guy stiff changes you, and he was an honest mistake, but you still blow up at him and you call him a moron. Well, the superficial thing that was naughty was calling him a moron, granted. But what was motivating that behavior? Are you getting enough sleep? How are your intimate relationships with people? Maybe it's because you're having a hard time with your mom that you're in such a rotten mood. Well, of course you're going to yell at the Makullah man if you're having a severe fight with your mom. Maybe that's what you should be doing tshuva for also. Maybe that's in fact more important to do tshuva for.
Just your general behavior with people? The
general behavior is very superficial. But it's like, well, what's motivating that behavior? Sure, you yelled at the Makullah man, but why? What's going on? Maybe you're not eating enough. That's usually the problems in life are quite simple. People come into my office and I end up not doing therapy initially with them. And the first things I do with them is, are you eating breakfast? Are you sleeping 8 hours? And then a lot of problems just magically go away.
Wow.
So that's a very nice thing to have in your toolkit is if life's not going your way, try those things out for a week and see if it changes. Yeah, people who don't get 8 hours sleep, usually most people get 6 hours, and that's horrid. It's killing you, hands down, it's killing you. But what you don't realize is your mental functioning. People think they're saving time, those 2 extra hours every day, I'm being so productive. Well, first, it's not true. They actually make less money, and the problems they try and sort out in their professional or personal life are the dumb problems that really don't do anything because they're just too tired to handle complicated issues. But more to the point, it's like you have the same functioning, getting 6 hours of sleep as if you were just snot drunk. That's snot drunk.
Never heard that.
Well,
what is snot drunk mean?
Bad. That's you downed. You're over the legal limit. It's bad. No, but people don't realize that they're walking around just as functional as a drunkard. Well, that's what 6 hours will do for you, and you don't.
Every night.
Oh yeah, it's horrid, and you don't sense it because basically being awake causes minor brain damage. That's kind of the outcome of being awake, and sleep fixes the minor brain damage. So the less sleep you get, the more brain damaged you are, and you're so brain damaged you don't realize. You're less self-aware of what's going on in your life that you don't catch. Man, I'm acting like a drunkard. You don't realize it. You only realize it after after a week of sleeping 8 hours, and you're like, wow, life's different. I didn't realize I was, I had all these dreams and ambitions, and I was this smart, and I didn't realize I could be this, interesting, and wow, I didn't, who's this person? It's a huge transformation. So it's like, it's not obvious what you have to do tshuva for. You have to really start thinking about, okay, well, here I am yelling at the Makullah man, but how did I get here? That's a bigger question. So, okay, so...
what do you mean by doing tshuva for bad character traits, though? Why should you verbalize, Hashem, I'm sorry for being...
Verbalization is super important, because most people don't do a good job thinking. That's really the bottom line. We don't think in an organized way. Either people are thinking in images, which are low-resolution images, that are not so detailed, or like the narratives, if you think in narratives... Out of curiosity, do you think in images or words?
What do you mean?
Your thoughts, your actual thoughts. Do you think in images or words?
Can you give an example of...
When you think, are you seeing things move like watching a movie, or are you hearing a narrator, like someone telling a story? People, yeah, okay, both. Some people are both.
Mostly narrative.
Okay, mostly narrative.
I think in daydreams.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Like if you're only doing one, that means half of a normal human experience is not how you think, because like we see things and we hear things, and like if you don't, that's missing. You do both. You're great, but even still, it's not organized. It's like a bunch of firing of thoughts and ideas and images. It's not well ordered. What verbalizing does, putting something into words or writing, what that does is it organizes your thoughts. You have to like. It's not just you had a thought, but your feet are held to the fire to make sure you're accurate in what you're thinking. And accuracy is big. It might feel like, the wine pudding, it's more or less true. And well, it's like, way back if you make a diagram of this sort of thing as well, the two options at the very beginning are fairly narrow, but the V spreads out to the point, well, look 2 miles ahead in your life. The two versions that you had are going to be extremely different, so verbalizing tshuva is organizing what you're trying to figure out, what problem you're trying to tackle, and to then come up with a real solution, how not to do it again. Because just thinking about it's not going to do much.
Yeah.
Even if you really feel it, like in people, people really do feel embarrassed and upset, and that just keeps occurring in life because few people actually put it in words, put it in writing. Yeah.
If you beat yourself up, you have to do tshuva for that.
What do you mean by beat yourself up?
Like if you would do that to someone else, you probably have to do tshuva.
Yeah. yeah. Then yes. Yeah,
what does that look like?
Same thing. Just do tshuva for that. You have to take care of yourself too. Just like you have to take care of other people. The way Rav Wolbe kind of looked at it was your neshama is kind of like a parent, and your body is kind of like the child. You have to be a good parent to your child. You have to treat your body nicely, which means your mind and your feelings, and like these are parts of our bodies.
Your body's a child, your mind is the parent?
Your neshama is the parent.
Oh.
You have to develop a sense of that neshama, and you have to be a good parent to yourself. And okay, not everybody had a good model for parents, and you might have to sit down and read a couple books on what good parenting looks like. Like really, that might actually be. In order to do the Torah, you might have to learn some parenting books, because that's how you have to treat yourself.
I know.
So for the Rambam, can I bring this back to the Darabbanans? For the Rambam, because we have this ability to create meaning, well, you would have to do tshuva for transgressing a Darabbanan. For the Ramban, I mean shogeg. I don't mean when you intentionally do it. This is only when you did so by mistake. Of course, if you intentionally broke a Darabbanan, everybody's going to say you have to do tshuva. This is only when it was done by accident. But for the Ramban, when it's an accident, well, the way the Ramban thinks about Darabbanans is, well, it's functional. It's you want to listen to rabbis, and so if that's the whole thing, if every Darabbanan is being a rabbi listener, well, okay, there is room to say, I didn't know. I am a rabbi listener. I just didn't know that the rabbis had anything to say on this topic. So there, for the Ramban, you would not be required to do tshuva when you broke a Darabbanan by a mistake. So, like you're getting back to what we were talking about last week, you didn't know all this stuff about second day Yom Tov. You want to be a rabbi listener. You just didn't know the rabbi said to do it.
Yeah.
So that would be the difference there. Okay, and then we finished off with how do Darabbanans come into existence? They have to be created by the Sanhedrin Agadol, the Jewish Supreme Court, and if you want to get rid of a Darabbanan, the Sanhedrin Agadol has to get rid of it. When a derabbanan is first created, the community has to accept it. If it's, rabbis can't just create willy-nilly insane derabbanans. It has to be livable. And if it's not livable, then the derabbanan in that first generation ceases to be. But if that derabbanan makes it, that first generation, it sticks. It has to have the Sanhedrin go get rid of it after that point. Okay, so what we're going to do today is talk about midrashim. What's up with those things? What are midrashim? So I want to give a couple different sources here that I think are kind of neat, that can kind of frame our discussion for today. And one is an interesting medrash in Gemara Chagiga. And it says like this. The medrash is playing with two different verses in Tanakh. And so, medrash, starts out, well, one verse is, they're talking about God's throne. So one verse says, quote, his throne was fiery flames from Sefer Daniel. And another in the same verse states, quote, till thrones were placed and one who was ancient of days sat, end quote, implying the existence of two thrones. Okay, so then the Gemara carries on, well, what are these two thrones? Well, okay, this isn't a hard problem that there's two thrones. Well, one throne is for Hashem, and one is for David HaMelech. As we have in a brisa, that's from Rabbi Akiva, who says exactly that. Well, the plot thickens, because Rabbi Yossi Aglili, another Tana, says to Rabbi Akiva, he says, Akiva, how long shall you make the divine presence profane by presenting it as though one could sit next to Hashem? Rather, the two thrones are designated for different purposes. One's for judgment and one's for righteousness. Rabbi Akiva doesn't do a good job at midrashim here. So then the Gemara continues. Well, did Rabbi Akiva accept the Rabbi Yossi's position? And we see he did. So we have another citation here that come in here. The following teaching of a different brisa. One throne is for judgment and one is for righteousness. This is Rabbi Akiva, and he took Rabbi Yossi's idea of how to interpret these two verses. But then Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah comes along and says, hey, Akiva, what are you doing busying yourself with the study of Agada? This is not your field of expertise. You should stick with the halachic topics of Nagayim and Olos. Leave Midrashim to the big boys. That's the end of that Gemara. And Nagayim and Olos are the most complicated areas of halacha. Okay. So we see, well, that's kind of interesting. Even when we're talking about Tanayim, whatever Agadic works are, there's a special skill to it. Not just anyone can do it. Not even someone like Rabbi Akiva, who our entire halachic system is based on Rabbi Akiva's approach to halacha. So it's like Rabbi Akiva plays a pretty big role in Judaism. We're Rabbi Akiva guys. But even he didn't make the boat in being able to tackle Agadic works properly. There's another Tanaic source, this is from the Sifrei, Parshas Ekev, that says that if you want to know Hashem, learn Agada. Okay, good idea. I want to know about Hashem. Then we have a Gemara from the Yushalmi, in Maisros. It says Rabbi Zera made fun of people who would make drushos, who would delve in Agadic works. We don't learn anything from Agada. And then he commanded his son, Rabbi Yirmiyah, he said, stick with halacha and ignore Agada. Don't get involved. A bunch of morons. Okay. Now we have another Yushalmi, this time from Gemara Shabbos. The Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, one who writes Agada has no portion in the world to come, and one who listens to them doesn't receive reward. So we got a lot of interesting statements about Agadic works. On the one hand, we're saying, hey, this is how you learn about Hashem. I like that. And then we have a whole bunch of other sources that are saying, stay away from them. Either it's for dumb people. Only dumb people do that sort of thing.
From Agada?
Mm-hmm. What's Agada?
Well, and we're going to spell this out. What are Agadic works? No, let's dump right in there, because these are, I am throwing around terms. I mean, that's not so fair. So, what are Agadic works? What are midrashim? Because these terms are used interchangeable.
Agada and midrashim are the same thing?
Okay, it depends. Technically speaking, an Agadic work is anything that is non-halachic based, whereas a medrash is halachic based. And the midrashim, the technical term medrash, were the Tanaic statements that predate the Gemara, and the Gemara was built on these texts. The wrinkle is that people don't generally use these terms, don't generally use the technical terms. So when you see the word medrash, it can be interchangeable. Sometimes when someone says the word medrash, they really mean Agada. Sometimes when people say the word medrash, they don't mean Agada. They actually mean a halachic sort of, this proto-Gemara stuff.
So, sorry, could you repeat? Yeah. So you said Haggadah, anything that's not halacha based?
Right.
Halachic based?
And that's for sure.
What's the medrash?
And medrash is either, the technical term medrash is referring to halachic works that predate the Gemara.
Or pause it.
Oftentimes, though, people use the word medrash oftentimes people use medrash as a slang term for Agada. So when you're reading something, you have to know, is the person you're reading, are they using the slang term medrash or are they using the technical term medrash? So this is a wrinkle. I'm sorry, I apologize for Judaism.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I can't help that.
Now, for the Jews that do
yeah. Okay, so the Shiltei Giburim, he's a Rishon. He outlines, looking at Aggadic works, there's really three types, he says. Some are exaggerations, some are discussions of theological ideas, and some are moral and personal understandings that Chazal had. That's how he kind of outlines them. So we're going to be talking about, in the first part here, we're going to be talking about Aggadic works. And at the very end, we're going to swing around and start talking about, what about these halachic midrashim? What place do they have compared to the Gemara? Which we, like I said, in previous classes, we decide halacha only based on the Gemara. Anything else is out as far as halacha is concerned. So we got one question here. We got all these Aggadic, interesting Aggadic stories. What do we do with them? First question is, are we obligated to believe in them? So here we have a machlokas. Rav Moshe Teku, in his Sefer Ketav Tamim, he comes out swinging. He has a very bold statement. He asserts that we have to understand all Aggadic works literally, and we must believe them wholeheartedly. We are obligated, he says.
Who says this?
This is Rav Moshe Teku. He was one of the Balei Tosfos. And he's fairly representative of the Balei Tosfos because as an approach, usually the Balei Tosfos do take on Aggadic works very literally. As a sense, like that's kind of where they come from from their halachic tradition. Whether or not they come out and say it, when you're going through, say, Rashi, when he's bringing midrashim, you get a very fair sense that he seems to mean these midrashim oftentimes very literally. It's rare that, but he does, but it is rare that he pulls back. Sometimes he does take non-literal positions, but you have a sense that he was pushing, he was understanding those in a more literal context. Well, in Rav Moshe Teku, in his Sefer, he's coming out swinging against Rav Sadia Gaon, one of the Gaonim.
Yo.
He was one of the first. That's right. I know you like the Gaonim. Yo, I love Rav Sadia. I tried to convince my wife to name our son Sadia. I love that name.
Yeah, it's a really cool
name. She wasn't into it one bit. So Rav Sadia, he was one of the first to actually outline Jewish theology. Having books about Jewish belief is something we all take for granted, but way back in the day, that just wasn't done. So he actually was one of the very first to write works on what Jews ought to believe. And he took a very non-literal position, that you shouldn't take Aggadic works literally, that they are highly metaphorical. So Rav Moshe Teku basically calls him an idiot and an ignoramus, and that, sorry, chief, missed the boat, you have to take them literally. So that's position number one. And that they're divinely inspired, no less. They're from Har Sinai. This is the argument Rav Moshe Teku makes. The Ramban, in his in the Kisvei Ramban, he over there's a couple other places where he kind of gets into this, but he compares Agadic works more like a drasha that a Rav would give in shul. They're more moral based. They're there might be halachic ideas supporting them, but they're more of like an insight into people. They're very theologically based, and that one's not obligated to believe in them literally. They're not. You don't have to believe them as being true in order to be Jewish. You're not an apicorus. You don't get kicked out of the club for thinking that they're not literally true. What's interesting is he doesn't exactly take a position, are they actually literally true or not? Or, what true means. Knowing the Ramban, I don't think he means literally true the same way Moshe Teku does. But he's not making an argument, do what you want with them. He's just kind of drawing a line in the sand that you're still Jewish and you're not considered a heretic if you don't want to buy into Agadic works. That's the Ramban. And this is supported by the other Gaonim. In Otzer Gaonim, we see the positions of Rav Shrir Gaon or Rav Hai Gaon, that what Agadic works are. They're assumptions that Chazal made. So as far as assumptions go, Chazal assumptions are the best. They're the most informed about Judaism. But one's not obligated to believe in them, to rely on them. And Rav Hai extends this further, saying, no, these are not from Har Sinai. They're not a part of the Masorah, and these are the personal views of Chazal. And that's one reason why they're not even looked at as a source of halacha. That's why we don't paskin from Agadic works. Okay. As far as these two views, one outcome we see from Shmuel Hanagid is the way he kind of looks at Agadic works as, again, personally, how do you look at them? Well, Shmuel Hanagid kind of says, listen, you personally accept whatever you're able to make sense out of. What you can't make sense out of, no harm, no foul. And the Kuzari goes so far as to say, listen, many of these are impossible to understand. That these Agadic works were written in secret. That the actual Amoraim who stated these metaphors, these deep theological ideas, because they're not just, they're not silly metaphors. These are deep, meaningful things. Well, one thing about metaphor is that, they exist in a context of relationship. If they're kind of like, one way of thinking about them from the Kuzri's perspective is they're like an inside joke. If you and I have an inside joke and I just reference it, well, you'll laugh, right? That's what an inside joke is. And everyone else who hears it will just look at you like you're a moron. That's basically how the Kuzari is describing Agadic works, is that outside the close Talmudim of the Amora who created this Agadic idea, outside of the close Talmudim, no one's going to understand them. And in fact, the Amoraim did not want them. The different Amoraim, different Tanaim, they didn't want them included in the Gemara, but because these students loved their rabbis so much, they slipped them in anyway. They were sneaky. The Rambam has a more middle-of-the-road position than, say, Rav Moshe Teku or the Ramban. In the beginning of Perek Chelek, Gemara Sanhedrin, Mishnah Sanhedrin, the Rambam has a very lengthy sort of treatise where he gets into how to understand Agadas, what are the 13 principles of faith. Like, I would highly recommend going to the Rambam's Mishnah in Perek Chelek and reading it. It's a really interesting read. And so one thing that he notes over there is, well, he almost, he says, listen, there's three types of people who are playing around with midrashim, with Agadic works. The majority of people are kind of like our buddy Rav Moshe Teku. They take him at face value, they think they're literal, and these people are ignorant. He kind of throws back the name calling. The more Rishonim you learn, you kind of it's kind of interesting to see how these guys talk smack. They really dig into each other. So they're calling each other morons left, right. So he puts it on the table. It's a moronic idea to take Agadic works literally. And he says that they're making a fundamental mistake because they're fighting so hard to take these ideas literally because they think that they're defending Chazal, that they're elevating their status somehow. But really they're just portraying them as fools. Because within these midrashim, in these Aggadic works, they have very deep, meaningful moral and theological ideas. And it's when you make them literal, you lose them. You miss so much when you take them literally. So that's group number one, the Rambam outlines. Group number two, you had a question?
Oh, no, I was pausing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I hope it whatever. Do the Karaites study Gemara?
Yep, but they don't take it as meaningful.
So it's the point
Wait, who
of
does-
studying it.
Karaites. Interesting ideas. They look at it as just interesting ideas.
Who are these interesting?
Karaites. They're a branch of, they broke off of Judaism way back when, and their basic argument was the rabbis are full of it. That's those sorts of people.
Don't want to read the Torah literally.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, so that's the Rambam's first group. The second group,
Do they think that because they're if everything from the Torah should be taken literally, so we should take the Haggadic works as literally because it just makes it more... Is that why they do it? Because it makes them more...
Well, that's an interesting thing because, what's cool about fundamentalist Judaism is that we're the only fundamentalist religion that doesn't take its written text literally. Like, an eye for an eye. That's a great example. No rabbinic authority says you gouge people's eyes out. But most fundamentalist religions like that, they're kind of stuck. They're like, this is the word of God, it must be true, and it must be literal. And they really back themselves into a corner. It's an oddity. It's like an interesting sort of thing. Like the firmest version of Judaism doesn't take its text literally. There is context is an important part of whenever you're reading something. Context is everything. So yeah, to answer your question, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, when it comes to Gemara is different. There is kind of an assumption that you should take statements in the Gemara literally because the assumption is they're trying to teach in the most straightforward manner.
Mm-hmm.
So wait a second. If that's the rule in Gemara everywhere else, well, it's a fair idea to want to apply that also to Aggadic works. It kind of falls apart contextually. When was the last time that you saw, a 15-story fiery bird laying egg that is so large that it crushes a city? That's one Aggadah. But kind of hard to justify that literally. But when you start opening it up, as the Rambam's point is, well, you shouldn't just adopt, Shmuel Nagid and the Kuzaris thinking of, well, just take what you can. It's no, there's a science here, and there's seriously what to learn from these Aggadic works. So his group number two is, well, they're kind of similar to the first group, that group number two does assume Chazal made these statements literally, but then they make fun of Chazal. These are kind of these are our Karaites or whatever, the people who like to bash the rabbis. And then there's group three, and the Rambam says this group is so small, it's really hard to even define them as a group. They're more of a bunch of guys than anything else. They're not actually a group.
Club.
It's a club. Yeah, it's less than a club. Yeah. Now this third group, well, they do take on this belief that Chazal never speak words that are empty. It's kind of like Moshe Teku. There's something there. Where the Rambam disagrees with Moshe Teku is, what does it mean true? Truth is not literal. In fact, the most important true things in life oftentimes are they're not physical, they're not objects, they're not in the world, they're concepts we sense, they're things we feel, they're thoughts we have, the sense of things as we go through life. And that's true. And that might be more true than physical objects like a table or chairs or a tree. So the Rambam is definitely he's almost like a mix, an amalgamation between Moshe Teku and, say, the Ramban. it might not even be so fair. I think that the Ramban is in agreement with the Rambam, but I think the Rambam himself pushes more that you have to push yourself to learn these things. Like, it's not such an option, you know. It's not like Shmuel and Agid, well, personally just accept what you got. Like, no, there's a science here, and you have to invest to discover these truths. And it seems to be that as far as these rabbinic positions go, the Rambam seems to take the day. As far as modern day poskim, modern day achronim, say the Maharal adopts the Rambam's position as opposed to the others. That no, we don't take Haggadah works literally, but they have real meaning in them. They have real truth in them that you must discover and work out. Okay. So then the kind of question falls back to, well, okay, fair enough. Well, why, if there's real meaning here, well, why wouldn't you just say it in a straightforward way? Like, why even use, if we're going to say that Haggadah works are mishalim, that they're metaphors, well, skip the metaphor. Because it is a fair criticism. Well, if we have the rule that if it's in the Gemara, you have to teach it in the most straightforward, most sensible way. So why is it the most sensible way to teach these deep concepts with metaphors as opposed to just say it, man? So there's two ways to kind of play around with this idea. One, both are from the Ramchal, but one is from his book on rhetoric, where he describes, as a speaker, you are basically, as you're speaking to a group, you're a walking contradiction. Because you have to speak about things your audience recognizes, but your job is to tell them things they've never heard of or understood before. That's your job as a speaker.
Can you repeat that?
That as a speaker, you have to tell your audience things they already know and can recognize, but your goal in doing so is to teach them something they've never known before. So how do you do that? Well, there's two ways. One is going through things step by step, a very linear sort of way, where you start where everyone understands in a certain topic, and then step by step you progress and you lead them towards information that it was not obvious or they hadn't thought of before. But, if they would have put enough thought into, they would have gotten there because there's a linear progression. And that's one way of doing that as a speaker. The other way is using a metaphor, where basically what you're doing is the metaphor is like a vehicle that you fill this vehicle up with words, you fill this vehicle up with meaning, with what is not obvious, but the shell of it is easily understood, and you zip that little car over to your audience. That's how you transport complicated ideas. You put them into a metaphor. The Ramban, in his introduction to his commentary on the Chumash, well, he basically is describing exactly that, where it's a cool intro to read, because he says, okay, listen, well, like mostly what I'm going to be doing is giving a straightforward understanding of all the verses in the Chumash, and every now and again, I'm going to start dealing with Kabbalistic, Agadic ideas, and these ideas cannot be understood with logic, they cannot be understood with reason. Don't try to. If you try and understand these things with logic and reason, you're just going to mess up. And basically curses people who try to understand Agadic, deep theological ideas using reason and logic. Yeah.
Are we more able to grasp metaphors?
I think so. They're very powerful. They're very powerful. That's why they're so great to use. But that's also like, if you're going to use them, you have to craft them in a very well thought out way. But yeah, they're very powerful. They're very powerful. A lot of therapies are based on the idea of only speaking in metaphors, because like a lot of times people get stuck in their own thinking, And so if you talk to them in a normal way, you basically trigger their biases. So you don't want that because their biases are leading them to be anxiety-ridden and depressed. So, well, how do you get around that? How do you communicate a new way of looking at the world? Well, what you do is you talk with them in metaphors, where you're saying words they've never heard before, so nothing triggers their biases. And the metaphors are just so packed with insight and meaning that it hits the person. Because, again, the shell of the metaphor is very understandable. And this is exactly what the Ramban is talking about, is you don't understand the metaphors with logic and reason. They're symbolic. They're not math. So you kind of have to feel out a metaphor more than you think it out. Although you have to do both, you're more feeling out a metaphor. They are dangerous, though, because when you're feeling out a metaphor, the playing field's wide open. You could feel out a medrash in many ways that might actually be quite insane. And so this is one reason why, as a halacha, especially when it comes to Kabbalah, let's say, those are Aggadic works. I mean, the Zohar is a collection of Aggadic works. Why it's forbidden to study the Zohar, it's forbidden to study Kabbalah before you have learned all of halacha. And so there's a great medrash. This is a bit of a paradox. Here's an Aggadic work on why you should not learn Aggadic works before learning halacha. So we have the story of the four chachamim entering Pardes. One was our friend way back at the beginning of my class, Rabbi Akiva, where Rabbi Akiva and Ben Zoma and Ben Azai and Elisha ben Avuya all went into Pardes, meaning they entered into this very spiritual realm. And Ben Zoma went crazy.
Why did you have that name?
Ben Azai, I don't know. Ben Azai committed suicide after this experience. Elisha ben Avuya became a heretic after entering Pardes, and the only one to make it out alive was Rabbi Akiva.
Wait, could we back up? I missed all of that.
Yeah, that's a big one. Once upon a time, four chachamim entered Pardes. Pardes is, kind of think of it as like the spiritual manifestation of Gan Eden. Pure Kabbalah. Pardes. Kabbalah is oftentimes referred to as Pardes. Literally, the word literally means orchard, but they entered Gan Eden and made direct contact with pure spiritual ideas. One, Ben Zoma. These are all Tanaim. These are heavy hitters. You learn Gemara. These names all come up quite frequently. These are not small figures. Well, Ben Zoma went crazy. That's what happened to him when he encountered Pardes. Ben Azai committed suicide afterwards. Elisha ben Avuya became a heretic. And only one man made it out alive, and he was just fine. It was Rabbi Akiva. One commentary on this Agada is from Rav Moshe Cordova. He was a Kabbalist. He was the teacher of the Rizal, and he describes what happened. The problem that three other Tanaim encountered was they started to anthropomorphize their experience. They were mistaking metaphor for literal truth. So this Moshe Cordova would not jive so nicely with Ramosha Teku. It's like that's what made them go crazy or kill themselves or become a heretic. Is they took their experiences literal, and they were just too open. They were just too open to the experience. Whereas Rabbi Akiva, he, like I said before, our halachic system is based on Rabbi Akiva and the way that he understood the oral tradition. He is the epitome of halacha. That's what he symbolizes. And it was because he was rooted in halacha. He was rooted in literal behavior that is good and bad, right and wrong, that he had a reference point to guide him and not get lost when he was encountering these metaphors, these mashalim, these deep Kabbalistic ideas. So, while thinking about this one is, this might be why, getting back to some of the other Rishonim I was citing, say, Shmuel Nagid was saying, hey, listen, take what you can, but take it easy when it comes to Haggadah works, is because the action might be too dangerous. You might be in over your head with these sorts of ideas. And so, okay, take what you can, but hold them lightly. They're not simple. We start talking about ideas of what is truth, what is not truth, what is real, what is not real. Human experience is not mostly talking about the physical world we live in. Most of what we talk about is really the meaning, the underlying significance of the things that happen to us. So we have to be in that world. It's almost like the world itself is a mushal. It literally is a mushal. Like, we don't look at objects in their non-arbitrary fashion. Like, if I were to ask about describe this table, well, you might describe what you do with it or what's on it, what purpose does it serve, what its meaning is. But you're not going to start telling me what the thickness of the wood is, what its density is, how many atoms make up this table. We really don't care about those sorts of things, although we can describe them. Most of human experience is meaning. So most of the world is a metaphor. That's kind of one way of thinking about it. So, it's almost like we're caught in a catch-22 is like, well, okay, like, be careful going into pardes, but at the same time, you kind of have to. In a certain respect, you're already there. That's what the world is. It's a world of meaning. So how do you navigate that world of meaning? How do you not get lost? How do you not just start, being like a crazy Karaite, and saying whatever it is you want to say? Well, you have to have a beacon, a lighthouse that guides your path. That's what halacha is.
Yeah.
Halacha is spiritual ideas acted out. It's pure spirituality acted out. And once you act it out, that's the first step in understanding spiritual ideas, like Rabbi Akiva. And you can become more sophisticated in your thinking. You should be a Rambam person and try and work these issues out. We are given this Tzelem Elokim to understand meaning, and we're meaning makers in many ways. So it's something we ought to do and we have to do. Tread carefully. Don't make the mistake that these other Tannaim did of taking them too literally. Truth's not literal. I don't mean to sound silly. I don't mean that simplistically, but like, truth is not literal. Fundamentally, the whole idea is, because this is like the classic debate, like religion and science. But like, well, what's science? What's a good definition of science? Is the description of how objects behave. That's what science is. And then we make technologies based on how objects behave. But again, like, that's not mostly what we're concerned about in life. We don't care about how objects behave. It's very nice that a bus moves 50 miles per hour. And it's very interesting, the physics behind how something that massive and something moving that quickly, well, what happens when it hits a human body? We don't care about the physics of it. The meaning of the loss of life is what catches our eyes. That's truth. And that's what I mean by, literal fact is not truth. Because it doesn't mean anything. So that's
That sentence, isn't that contradicting? I mean, I know you just spoke about this for so long, but literal fact is not truth.
Yeah. Yeah, that is mixing up terms.
Okay, so for the table example,
yeah,
like, I could say this serves only as a holder for food.
Yeah.
So that's fact.
It's a
but
purpose.
It's not truth.
It's a purpose. When you look at it, because you can define objects in different ways, like, take a library. This is a perfect example. We categorize books based on topic. What's the book about? What does the book mean? But that's from a literal perspective, that's fairly arbitrary. We could easily have categorized books as, books that mention the word the 15,000 times. That's one category. And there's books that mention it 15,001 times. That's another category. Or we could categorize books based on the color of the cover itself. That's another way of categorizing books. There's a million and one ways there's a really infinite amount of ways to categorize books, but there's only one that we usually use. What's the book about? What does it mean? And that's what I mean. Fact is not truth. Because it's factual how many times the word the is mentioned in the book, but it's not useful. What a table's made out of is not useful. What it does is useful. What it means to us is useful. That's the point I'm making, and I think that's the spirit of Agadic work. So when we get back to all those interesting citations I was bringing up for you guys earlier on the beginning of class, is the first several citations, we'll put them all together. Agadic works are trying to learn what a Shem is. What does it mean about moral truth and spiritual ideas? Well, you need to learn Agada to understand those things. Getting back to the Sifrei. But at the same time, getting back to Rabbi Zera and how he was saying, listen, telling his son Rabbi Yirmiyah, just pay attention to halacha. There's a bunch of idiots out there who, Agada is not so important. Well, that's group 1 of the Rambam. That's group 2 of the Rambam. Those are the sort of people who just take Agadic works literally. There's nothing worth anything in that. Stick with halacha. Because if you do, then you have a map and a means to be able to interpret meaning in the world, and maybe you can start making sense of Agada. But don't do what everyone else does. Don't treat it like a newspaper. And that gets back to this idea, of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi saying, someone who writes down Agadic works has no portion in the world to come. It's like, these are complicated ideas. They're so complicated, maybe you shouldn't write them down. Maybe you should hesitate to write them down because people won't understand your metaphors so good. Maybe you have bad metaphors, even though maybe your idea is true. It's like, watch out. You could actually harm people with the sort of metaphors that you use. Lots of writing on this. You might actually lose your Chelik Olam Haba because your metaphor is so bad that you're going to make people go off the derech. But he doesn't say, don't engage the metaphors. He doesn't say don't engage the Agadic works. And the second part, one who listens to them doesn't receive reward. These are not things you listen to. These are things you work out. So yes, don't listen to them. Don't engage them superficially. Don't listen to them. Think about them. Beat them out. Tear them apart. Get in their guts and figure out what the underlying meaning is in Agada. Because at the end of the day, the Sifrei got it right. That's the most intimate way you will understand Hashem. But like the Rambam says, it's a science. And not so many people are up to the challenge. Just because not so many people are up to the challenge doesn't mean you get to shirk responsibility. It just means when you engage them, take them deadly seriously and know you're handling fire. It's no coincidence that Agadic works are oftentimes symbolized as fire. You have to tame them, otherwise it will destroy you. They're dangerous if they're just used in a haphazard sort of way. That's what I got.
Thank you.
That's what I got. Questions, comments, concerns?
The lot to follow. Just want to point out, I only fell asleep at 5 a.m. last night. So my brain is
a little bit of an alcoholic over there, huh?
That's not true.
Oh no! All right, guys. Cool.
Thank you so.
All right,
so
take it easy.
much. I don't even know how to categorize these notes. A lot of bullet points. But no, this class was awesome.